and he is an excellent analyst, and you must take his message into consideration. Like any planner, any developer, you want to know where you are before you are able to build a plan to go forward. And so Bruce has kind of laid out to us understanding of what our country is going through. And then basically we need to now put things in place to ensure we can come out of this. Unfortunately, I mean, all we're hearing right now is all the promises of grandeur, but no one is bringing the public up to speed on what's happening around us in real time. And so for that, Bruce, I want to thank you for a real-time breakdown of where we are financially, because it does impact on how we move forward as a country and how we move forward as political entities in our political party, and how we're going to solve the problems that we have before us. So right now, I want to take this moment to introduce the deputy leader of the Alliance Party for Progress, Ms. Lynette Eastman. She is the candidate for St. Philip West. And I know that she's busy working in St. Philip West. So I'm hoping that those of you who can hear us and who live in St. Philip West and St. Philip South to make sure that you give some over to these two wonderful individuals, these son and daughter of the soil, who are working tirelessly to ensure that we can have a future that we all can be proud of. So Ms. Lynette Eastman, I would like for you to take over now and give us your presentation.
Thank you very much, Everton. And I should say that Everton is the candidate in St. George South, as he might not remember to mention that. I want to thank all of you here for giving us the opportunity to come into your homes and whatever space you're in at the moment in order to present our manifesto to you. Now, this manifesto we have developed not only with our own thoughts, but actually we have had the opportunity to discuss these issues with many individuals as we canvass the constituency. And therefore, already we have had input from the people of Barbados, because we fundamentally believe that that is what democracy is about. And that is how we intend to proceed, that as representatives, we would not just put our ideas on the table, but we would converse with constituents, develop ideas, and present them as representatives, true representatives of the people. I would like to focus really on three matters from the manifesto. And you can read the manifesto and go into these issues in greater detail. The first has to do with youth engagement. This is of concern to many people and should be, because whenever we go to the newspapers and we see that there is a violent crime, quite often we realize that the individuals involved are under 25 years old. Sometimes they're still within their teens. And this must be a concern to many of us, because what it means is that our young people are not transitioning successfully from childhood into adulthood. And we believe that this is something that we must look at very carefully. We have situations now where young people are expelled from school, and the truth is there's no follow-up. There's no follow-up from government at all. It is really left to the parents, the friends, family, to try to find some other school to get that child into. And essentially, if no one wants to take the child ends up staying at home, maybe liming with friends, with older people, and then they become victims as individuals who are up to less than legitimate activity tend to prey on them. And quite often this is where it starts. We also have situations where young people are introduced to the criminal justice system while they're at school, when they're in their teens. We believe that this is inappropriate and that some positive interventions have to be made when we realize that children are at risk. Quite often, we recognize that they're at risk from birth, but there are no interventions for them. You know, in discussing this matter with some constituents, they actually said, well, maybe what we need is training for parents from very early when they become parents. Quite often, you know, they go home with a little human being and they don't know much about how to raise the child. So these interventions are important. We believe that there should be a specific program developed for young people to transition from childhood into adulthood, and then even from their learning institutions, secondary school, tertiary, into the working world. Now, there are many cultures that have a tradition of transitioning from childhood to adulthood, but we have lost ours. So there's a need to create one. It should be introduced into the schools and into the primary and secondary schools. But it is also still needed for some young people who have left school already. And therefore, we, the APP, we would be very much interested in developing a program and would develop a program for youngsters who have already left school. What we're talking about is getting young people involved in developing a life plan and a personal development plan so that they can learn all the things that we now say we wish we knew when we were 16. So why not start teaching our children about these things when they're 13? If when they're 13, they're of the view that they would like to acquire a home, let's start talking to them about how would you actually acquire a home? What would you do? So that is the first issue. And there's so many other recommendations which need to be added, but we can discuss those in the future. The second point has to do with creation of new industries. And my colleague, Bruce Hennis, started to discuss this. Because we have debt, how are we going to get out of debt? The only way that we can pay back our loans and have some for ourselves to pay our expenses is if we really focus on creating new industries. We're not saying that we're going to do away with the tourism industry. Practically every country in the world has a tourism industry. So yes, we do need to have that tourism industry, but it is a tradition for Barbados and other countries as well, and other states and provinces, to relook what you're doing in your economy and seek to develop new industries. The new industry that we have focused on is the creative, technology, and cultural sector. And we believe that these sectors can be bound together in order to create an industry. The reason that we believe this is important is when we look internationally, we see that this industry is extremely, what should I say, there is quite a bit of revenue that is generated from this industry. We also see that it is COVID resilient. All of us continue to get our programs from CNN and wherever else. That is part of the creative sector using technology. The second point is that we already have a base for this in Barbados. There are already, as we know, individuals from Barbados, in Barbados, who are creating music and they're able to sell it abroad. And when I say music, I'm also talking about creating beats and also creating, for example, instrumental works that people may want to use in their films. So it is really endless as to what you can do in terms of music. And then there's film. And when we say film, we mean full-length feature films, but we also mean short films, we mean documentaries, we mean ads. All of these things we can do. And then when it comes to technology, we already have Barbadians who are involved in creating software in Barbados. Some of them have never gone abroad to study. They're straight out of our universities and schools, and they're creating software in Barbados for sale to companies abroad, and they're earning income out of that. So the point I'm making is that we already have in our infancy an industry. When we created the international business sector, we created it almost from scratch. We had to put legislation in place. We created new entities. This is a sector that is already in existence, but it needs investment and it needs a structure. And what do I mean by investment? I do not mean offering artists the opportunity to paint murals or giving musicians a gig at Independence or at Cropova. I'm talking about building an industry where some of the things that I mentioned and many more, because I know those in the creative sector, they would have so many ideas themselves. But to develop this industry, especially focusing on export. Now, when I say structure, our recommendation is that we need to set up a ministry particularly for this, not to attach it to another ministry. The focus of this industry would be to build for export, to develop for export, to create for export. Yes, it would be consumed in Barbados as well, but our focus would be export, to earn foreign exchange, to ensure that our people who are in the creative and technology sectors and cultural sectors are engaged on a full-time basis, that they earn money on a monthly basis, not that it is seasonal, which is part of the difficulty. We believe that if we focus on a new industry, and that is the one that we suggest, but attached to that is going to be also other sectors like education that could very well be a part of that cultural, creative, and technology sector, where we can have students here coming to study in Paradise and bring in their foreign exchange to us. My third point has to do with the NGO sector, a sector that has been neglected, I think, and really has not been recognized as being as important as it can be and should be in Barbados. One of the recommendations coming out with respect to this sector is to give it a seat at the social partnership table, and we agree with that. And we have embraced that and made that recommendation coming out of our manifesto, that is what we would do given the opportunity. We would also ensure that there is an umbrella organization for the NGO sector, which would be supported by government. There's certain fundamental things that such an organization would need. Over time, they may be able to wean themselves off of any government support, but initially, we need to support the NGO sector. And I make that point too in connection with the youth and with the creative and cultural and technology sector, because there are NGOs who are engaged in those activities. And certainly, if, for example, with young people, some of the interventions for them could be through non-governmental organizations. So we believe that the NGO sector is very, very important to our continued development. I mean, in addition to providing the social services which they now provide, and those also which have a community base, because community is so important. And we saw that during COVID, how we all needed to go back to working together and working with each other. So the NGO sector has a key role to play. And when they are strengthened, it means then that they can bring resources into Barbados, because there's some resources that are allocated internationally for the NGO sector. which government cannot access, nor the private sector. So if they were strong enough, they would be able to bring international resources to Barbados. So I'm going to end my presentation there on those two issues. As I said before, there's more in the manifesto for you to see on those issues. So I want to thank you, and I will hand you back over to Everton Holligan.
Thank you so much, Lynette Eastman, Deputy Leader of the Alliance Party for Progress, and also the candidate of West. That very strong points. And of course, much of what she's talking about can be perused in the manifesto. It's going to be loaded online as soon as we're done here. You should be able to find that at appbarbados.org on our website. And you can give any of our candidates a copy so we can send you virtually as well so that you can have it. Key things that I think are important, Mr. Bruce Hennis, he started talking that trap that we're in, and he made some very telling points. He spoke of 1992, we borrowed $41 million from the IMF, and then 19, oh gosh, I think I have the numbers mixed up. It was 41 million, and then it was 68 million, but now we're at a whopping $854 million that we borrowed from the IMF. So at this point, we are really in a debt trap, and we have to create new industries in order to be able to get out of that trap. So just to go over that, in 1982, we borrowed 68 million. In 1992, we borrowed 41 million, correct. And in 2021, we borrowed 854 million. Of course, with all that debt accumulating and no more sugar industry to help us out, we need new industries at this point, given the impact of tourism and the impact that what's happening with sugar. We would need something different, and that's what Ms. Eastman was speaking of. She spoke of our cultural and creative and technology industries, which are the tools that we can use to bring us back out of this, but definitely touch on the importance of ensuring our young people are looked after in rights of past times, and making sure that we bring them along with us. They will have to shoulder and burden quite a bit of this debt that has been accumulated. And so with that in mind, you should know that the manifesto is packed with quite a bit of relevant information, but also information to help us understand where we must go in order for us to be able to get out of the situation that we're in. Without further ado, we have the leader of the Alliance Party for Progress, Mr. Joseph Avely, here with us. And we want Mr. Avely to now unmute his mic and present to us a summary of everything, but also to give us his insight on how we give forward to manage this election, but also be able to win and function on behalf of Barbados. Mr. Bishop Avely is the candidate for St. Michael's South. So please welcome Mr. Avely as he go forward to present to you. You are muted, Mr. Avely. You're muted, please.
Yeah. Are you hearing me now? Are you hearing me now?
Yes, loud and clear, loud and clear.
Thank you very much, Everton, and good evening to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this program as we launch the manifesto of the Alliance Party for Progress. I believe very strongly, Everton, that government's primary responsibility, it is an imperative. Government must make a revolutionary, meaningfully revolutionary, strong difference in the lives of the people of the nation that it leads. To me, the test of a government, what have we done after we have served that has made that strong, meaningful, and revolutionary difference in the lives of the people? One might say the government of this day is 3.5 years old, but what signals have we seen that suggest that this government is embarked upon any path that will bring about that strong, meaningful, and revolutionary change? amidst the lives of the people of this country. Just to illustrate, if you look at the contribution of Sir Grantley Adams, the first of our leaders in the modern culture, if we may put it like that, under Mr. Adams's leadership, this country moved to a place where we really put in place a platform for the building out of democracy as we pursued the exercise of nation building. We were intended as a people to become a strong, mature, and democratic nation. The early platform of foundation for that was laid by the Adams-led governments in the earlier days. Then came Errol Barrow, and to me, the meaningful, strong, and revolutionary change, a difference which those administrations under his leadership brought about Barbados. Barbados becoming an independent state, really breaking the yoke of colonialism and establishing a platform of education to facilitate mobility for a wide berth of its citizens. Then there was the second Adams, and his administration, short as it was, 8 years, I think, really laid the platform for a modern Barbados in terms of its infrastructure and even its early economic life in that new context. Of course, there was the issue of land, particularly so in rural Barbados, but to some extent also in urban Barbados through the tenantries freehold legislation. That was strong, that was meaningful, that was revolutionary, changed many lives. Many of us are where we are today because of that. Then under Owen Arthur, we had an expanded program of urbanization and rural development, upscaling of the Adams Initiative with respect to land ownership. That changed really the aesthetics. It changed the position of many in urban Barbados and rural Barbados who came into ownership of land and who therefore were able to improve the quality of housing, making for the Barbados we see today. That is a job unfinished. This government in 3.5 years, and with 2 resets, one in 2020 and another now at the end of 2021, with 2 resets called for on the part of the government to the people, has not sent us any signal of making any strong, meaningful, and revolutionary difference in the lives of the people. Yes, we have seen a feeble and fumble effort to bring us to a point of becoming a republic and attaining republic status. That is very controversial, highly controversial in the way it has been gone about. People have been left out of that process to a very large extent. But you would say, as I said, 3.5 years, not enough time to make that strong and meaningful difference, that revolutionary difference. Well, long enough time to show some sort of evidence that you have a vision that is leading you in that direction. And I sadly have to admit that I don't see any. And I think most Barbadians would agree with me on that. The Alliance Party for Progress plans to be very strong, Hero, as you would know, on the matter of governance. We want to introduce to Barbados a new model of governance, where the people, in fact, are once again the governors, not the cabinet, not a political party, and not an embodiment we call a prime minister. The people have to be the government and the center of governance in the model which we seek to introduce. The people must be the governors. People-centered, people-led government with high levels of accountability and strong mechanisms for such. We have committed to that. One big issue that we have to deal with and very early as we form the government is to begin the job of eliminating corruption through the implementation of enforced strong legislation. This government paraded the length and breadth of this country and chanted a chorus, and I was with them then, so I know that we would introduce integrity legislation in Barbados. 3.5 years passed, and up until 2 weeks before Parliament was dissolved, they were still telling you that in 3 weeks or so, they would introduce this integrity legislation. They did in the lower house. It was not perfect, and it went to the upper house. Those imperfections were pointed out. It was sent back to the lower house, And for a long time, it lay in abeyance. Finally, just a couple of months ago, it raised its head again in the lower house and then was deferred for the pursuit, for the action. We were promised early in the new year. Rather than get that, we had the dissolution of Parliament and the calling of an election in very questionable circumstances. The APP will move hastily to put in place measures to deal with the bad business of corruption in Barbados. One of the areas we will tackle very early is to make sure that there are higher levels of accountability, more frequent reporting of ministers with respect to their portfolio to the Parliament of Barbados and to the people of Barbados. And this will become an imperative. These are things which will be mandated. We look towards implementing electoral reforms in Barbados. We need to have proper financing of political parties. We need to have proper financing of elections so we do not have this skewed situation where the party in government that holds the purse seems to think it holds all of the power, and it uses the power of that purse to its advantage and to the disadvantage of other political parties, meaning by extension, disadvantage to people. We need electoral reforms, even in the way the Parliament is constituted. We need electoral reforms even with respect to our system of representation. This first past the post system is seriously open to question. Perhaps more proportional representation will give a more adequate reflection of how people feel out there. We look to offer a brighter day to Barbados and a better deal for Barbadians. Our future is just ahead if Barbadians would elect an APP government. And one of our principal pursuits as we start government will be to make sure that that new governance model is introduced, unfolded, and I've given you some elements of what might very well be involved there. We need to rescue democracy in Barbados. What do I mean by that? Look, if we're going to be engaging in a wholesome nation building exercise, we need to ensure that the practice of democracy is maturing. We have been stagnant as far as that is concerned. No real and significant changes have taken place in the way we do things with respect to governance, with respect to our electoral practices that would give the impression that we're serious about building a democracy. We can't just say Barbados is a democratic country. We must give full and true expression to that. We need to rescue our democracy from the power of purchase. We need to rescue our democracy from the power of purchase. What do I mean by that? There are people in Barbados who have the wherewithal, the financial means, the capital wherewithal to influence elections and the outcome of elections. That is happening. That happens perhaps in most elections in Barbados. And there's a strong effort on to ensure that it goes down in this particular election, which we're facing on January 19th. We need to be able to rescue the process from the influence of the power of purchase, those who have the capacity to purchase the outcome of an election by means of their support to political parties, financial support to political parties, and their wealth connections to political parties. The hand of privilege and the hand of purchase too strongly influence our democracy. We need to move it back to the hands of the people. And I don't mean seasonally, where people get the right to vote every 5 years, or in this case, 3.5 years, but that the people are in charge, and that is given practical and obvious and evident expression to the people are in charge, not the power of purchase and not the privilege of those who have the means to exert the influence of governments by that which they give to them. We believe strongly in the precept and principle of people-centeredness and policies which come from the bosom of the people and redound to the benefit of the people. Right now, we are having too often policies which are affected through legislation in Parliament because they represent the wishes of some international or regional institution. A lot of the legislation that I've seen come to the lower house in the last 3.5 years has been legislation that has been prompted by some action of the OECD or some other international entity, the European Union, or some regional compliance which we have to make sure that we honor. And that is what this government has been driven by. We need to see policies coming to the Parliament of Barbados that come out of the bosom of the people. It can only come when you involve people. It can only come when people are at the center of things. It can only come when you consult with people. And then those policies must redound to the benefit of the people. Now, as a people, we're not talking on a skewed way. One of the principal themes in this manifesto is the whole idea of universally shared prosperity, rather than the skewed type of prosperity and development that we are seeing in Barbados. We really need to change these things and to change them radically. And this is how a government makes a meaningful, a strong and revolutionary difference in the lives of people. There's some things you can do with respect to the economy. Let me be very brief here, very quick. We need to change the patterns of ownership in Barbados. We don't mean some form of socialism that is corrupted. We believe in democratic socialism. We don't share the philosophy of democratic centralism. We certainly don't share the philosophy, ideology of communism, but democratic socialism, where democratic privilege obtains, where power is shared right across and is in the hands of the people, and the privilege which results from those policies coming out of that context benefit as many as possible. The majority and the minority are never left out and never excluded. So we need to change the pattern of ownership. I've put it in this way, using this analogy, because that's the way it has been impressed upon me all these years. We were once slaves in their fields, and then we made some advancement and we became stewards. We became servants in their houses. And then we moved beyond that to the point where we have become stewards in their offices and businesses. We manage them, we're supervisors, we're under managers, and we manage those enterprises for other people who earn the wealth, exploit labor in Barbados. We need, as a majority class in Barbados, to move to the point where we become owners of business, owners of land, owners of property. That's a revolutionary change. That's what Tom Adams started. That's what ONAFA continued. I don't see any signs that this government is aware and sensitive to that. We need to address the issue of land, not only from the perspective of ownership, but why do we continue with this, in my view, ugly specter of people having to pay high levels of taxes on lands, which by dint of hard work and industry, they've come into to own. And we need to see how we can so introduce legislation that a land scarce country like Barbados does not find itself that its people are dispossessed because there is an overemphasis on foreign and ownership of property in Barbados, or a monopoly on ownership by a few to the detriment of the majority. We need to change the plight of small business in Barbados. Small business is the bedrock of this economy, and they've been getting a raw deal. The issue of lack of access to capital, the issue of lack of support from government when government has contract privileges to be extended. We need to do that. I believe that we should be looking again at the establishment of some kind of a national bank facility that can provide us the kind of windows in our economy that can help small businesses and other prospective Barbadians who look to advance themselves. Education, we need to be strong on the issue of specialization. I think that we are. I have said for a long time, we need not to have every school teaching the same thing to everybody, but we can specialize these schools, take away some of the stigma that attaches to some schools. A school like St. George Secondary, right in the heartland of Barbados agriculture, could be an institution, for instance, dedicated to agricultural and agri-tech related studies. We need to see our people given scholarships beyond those which are available from medicine and accounting and law, and people who are engaged in sports get national scholarships. We need to tie education to tourism. We need to tie education to the health platforms in Barbados. I've said these things before. Medical tourism, focus on forensics. We need, and in this manifesto, it is a strong point to be made that we need to ensure that there's financial training as well as part of that education system, perhaps in the informal sector for our young people. Housing, we need a new partnership for housing. This government has glibly talked about housing, made some major promises on housing. They would build multiple thousands. We haven't seen that. Now the Prime Minister is repeating that promise and increasing the factor of multiple thousands by some measure. Where in the world is that going to happen? What is the mechanism? A partnership for housing, as entailed in this manifesto, can bring us to that, where we partner with the banking sector, perhaps a national bank facility. We partner with small contractors. We partner with homeowners to get the job done. You know, government puts up the land. Government extends some credit to small contractors, reduces taxes and duties on building equipment and tools and materials to bring the cost down. And we have a special window, perhaps in the National Bank, that extends credit, a low interest, simply enough to carry the cost of operating that housing window. But we need a proper partnership for housing. Transport in Barbados is an area, a sector in our economy. It comes under social policy, but also comes on economic policy, where we need to really reform and do meaningful change. The government of the day, in our context, a government in Barbados should not be the principal provider of public transport. Provide a regulatory framework, manage the regulatory role, give some taxes and duties to operators of private sector, let them get bigger buses at cheaper costs, facilitate them, encourage them in the formation of cooperatives, and let's go. Government can retain the responsibility for the social aspects of transport to perhaps people who have limited access, and perhaps to provide transport at the those non-profitable routes and non-profitable hours. To make a meaningful difference and bring about revolutionary change with respect to youth, as Lynette has said, sports and the creatives and technology. Unemployment among youth, 30-something%. We say 16% in Barbados, 17% among women. It's true, but among youth, so 33, 34, 30. We need to change that. We need to take away the seasonal indignity, this practice of bringing young people in this seasonal indignity every 3.5 years when we have election, or every 5 years, by putting a hoe and a fork and a shovel and a broom in their hands and putting them on the street and making them think that that must be the extent and limit of their vision. Governments in 2022 in Barbados must do better than that. Or females being exploited on the job every day. Let's firm up the legislation on sexual harassment in the workplace. Let's provide, as we're planning to, that cost of living credit for single mothers to help them to care for their children. Cost of living is rising, wages are stagnant. These people are working under harsh conditions. A cost of living credit, perhaps $200 additional per month beyond that which they're now earning, or that which is now granted through any of the welfare mechanisms that we have, to keep them in pace with the rising cost of living. I'm not going to go any further. Lynette has spoken to the early interventions for children to ward off the business of deviance, which leads later to more serious crime, criminalization. That comes at a cost to the country and a loss to the country as well of these young lives.
Thank you so much, Mr. Agley. This is Bishop Joseph Agley, the candidate for St. Michael Central, as we are coming to the end of our launch for the manifesto. And you would imagine that Mr. Agley touched on many different points there, all covered in some degree in the manifesto. First, we started off with Mr. Bruce Hennis, give us an idea of where we stand financially as a country and why we must be really serious as we project forward. Ms. Annette Eastman spoke of issues related to the benefits of looking to the cultural and industries in a way in which we can generate a new industry to generate revenue on behalf of our country, so we can start to climb out of that debt trap that Mr. Bruce Hennis spoke of earlier. And then Mr. Joseph Agley would have rounded it all up just to give you little snippets of some of the essential topics that are covered in the manifesto and the ideas of the people of Barbados in cohesion with the Alliance Party for Progress as we project how we will move forward. Some of those things that Mr. Agley would have talked about was a meaningful, strong difference in which an APP would make a revolutionary difference to the lives of the people, ensuring that there is a transformation with our governance model, which is crucial because we need to nip corruption in the bud, and we need to make sure that our people are included in the decision-making processes of our country, and they are aware of how things are actually happening in real time. And so our governance model will have to be reviewed. We look at improved public services. We're looking at integrity legislation as a primary driver. One of the first things that we would work on is ensuring that integrity legislation, again, so that we can again account for the people's money. We're looking at health. Health was a crucial component of this legislation, of this manifesto, sorry, particularly right now in this COVID environment. The health of our people is crucial. We do know that is as a result of the high cases of NCDs that is causing so much trouble with persons who are having negative outcomes with COVID. So we have to do something to revolutionize our whole health environment. And that's also a part of our manifesto. We're looking at the environment. We cannot leave out the environment. We also have to look at the electoral reforms Mr. Adley would have spoken of, election funding and how that impacts the population negatively. And so the electoral reform that has to be put in place, we look at proportional representation, all of these essential components of governing a country on behalf of the citizens to ensure that they can benefit from it. We have that all mapped out in our manifesto. So you can go online at appbarbados.org and you'll be able to read more details of the manifesto, and then, or you can request WhatsApp from any of our candidates who will be able to share with you so that you can begin to dig in to our manifesto. And with that, I want to thank this evening for participating in this journey, and to make sure that we really can explore some of the content of this manifesto, but also to let you know that there are citizens in the APP that are working day out to ensure that we can do better for our citizens so our country can evolve and manifest the great destiny that we so desire. So thank you again for being here. Have a wonderful evening, and we appreciate you taking the time being here. Good night.
Mm-hmm.